item 13A of our discussion items. This is the museum flood project update.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council. This is Andy Bertelson, your Water Services Director. Thanks for having us this evening. I'll just say a few words while Sam Beckett fires up the presentation, and it looks like he's already put it on the screen. With us this evening, we have our staff, the staff that you're used to hearing from, Scott Overton, Sam Beckett, Gary Miller in Water Services, as well as Ed Schenk. And we also have our capital folks online, as well as Bryce Doty, and some partners as well, Lucinda Andriani with the Coconino County Flood Control District, as well as Christopher Tressler, the Flood Control District engineer. In fact, I just talked to Christopher. He was dealing with a situation out in the Williams area, but he said he would try to get on the phone to work with us as well. So with that, next slide, Sam. We were to give, it's now February 1st. We were queued up to give this presentation at the end of last month. Our meeting ended up going a bit late, and so tonight you have us this evening. So first, and probably what you'll want to hear about from Sam, is the siren system. And so Sam Beckett, who was with Coconino County, is now our streets director. We're lucky to have that coordination with him, so he knows a lot about that siren system. Sam, would you mind going back a slide? So we'll talk about the siren system. Scott Overton will talk about our feasibility study. Gary and Ed are online to talk about our sediment studies. And then Lucinda and Christopher are online to talk about the sediment basins. And they're also working those on-forest measures that we've heard so much about for the work on national forests for sediment reduction. Scott will also talk about the Killip Detention Basin. If you've been by that site recently, you see a lot of activity, particularly last week. So we're very excited about that work. And then Sarah Langley will be talking about communications and public involvement. And we're so fortunate to have Sarah as part of the team. So, okay, kicking it off to you, Sam. Thank you. Sam, I think you were going to talk about the siren system, if I remember correct.
Paradise and ending close to Route 66, being spread through kind of the heart of the flood zone, if you will. These 4 sirens are going to have some really cool functionality behind them. They will have multiple tones that we can use for different alerting types. It will also have a voice over function. In case we need to use that function, it will be able to translate into different languages. So it's a really versatile and kind of a really awesome piece. It's unfortunate that you have to implement something like this, but if you do, it's great to have all of the capacity that this system has. Currently working with a lot of our engineering department, and we'll be working with some of our development department to make sure that we can get these into our right of way, make sure they're all permitted properly, and that we can get this up and running as soon as possible. There's been a pretty aggressive timeline set on this, and it sounds like the vendor is going to be able to support that and hopefully get us there in a very short time frame. So we're definitely excited about this. This system will be actuated and triggered through the emergency notification system. It won't be something that somebody necessarily has to sign up for. This will just be in conjunction with the flood director protocols as we move forward. With that, I will hand it over to Scott Overton.
Thank you, Sam. Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is a point that we would like to spend a moment to talk.
Mute.
Yeah, I'm off mute.
It's probably my fault. Apologies.
How's that? What?
Scott, we hear you. You're good.
Yes, it is audible, Scott. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that, everyone. Good evening, Mayor and Council. The feasibility study is a piece I want to take a moment to speak to because we really are getting to a place in a juncture that is really at a point where it's pretty important. And if you recall, you've approved a feasibility study with Peak Engineering, and Julie Leeds' team has been looking at our existing infrastructure throughout the wash. So they started at Route 66 and they have addressed the wash of existing conditions from that location north into the actual wash, and they're going to conclude their work at Top of Paradise. This work has really gone well. They've walked the drainages, they've done a lot of analysis. I will say they've done a lot of math problems and a lot of flow calculations. And what they've now come back with is our first draft. And we did start that review right around the holidays. We're now getting to what their recommendation is to increase and to maximize our existing infrastructure. It is appearing like it'll be a larger box structure from 66 to Killip. That infrastructure is still, in concept, it's still being discussed, but they are utilizing that existing footprint. And as we start to see these studies kicked out of the engineering group, that will give us, and you in particular, the information we're going to need to make sure we're making smart investments, to really look at the existing infrastructure and understand what are its capabilities, what can it allow us to do, what's the cost benefit, and then how might we fund these segments, which we're referring to from 66 to Killip. This work's been progressing nicely. They also have focused a lot of effort on the Killip School site detention basins and the Killip School inlet design. That is now getting underway. They as well have started to look at an analysis at Dorotha, the Dorotha Crossing, Cedar, and all the way up through Linda Vista and the Parkway basins. Remember, it's top to bottom, but it really is our opportunity to look not only at the existing infrastructure, but once that is completed, we will start to analyze the alternative infrastructure ideas. Those are the ideas that are on the table, but we have not totally vetted, that may just add or do something completely different with the existing infrastructure, depending on the location. So this is going well. We're excited to see some of these drafts. We anticipate the next set of drafts in the next week or so, and it has moved very, very well. So thank you to those engineering teams that continue to work there. The hydrology modeling, we've also talked to that. That has also been completed. That was done at the year end, and we've now started to really start to look at that data. This is that flow D model that allowed us to understand the depths of proposed waters and where they might be within the neighborhood. That is the J.E. Fuller work that the county has been leading the charge on, but that work really helps feed the information to the study. So wanted to spend a little bit of time on this because I think you're going to start to see some results come from this, and we'll hopefully be able to share a little bit of those results next month with you in the next update. But I'm going to now turn it over to Ed and Gary, who are going to talk sediment studies.
Thank you, Scott. So this is Ed Schenk, Stormwater Manager. Good afternoon or good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the sediment study that the Flood Control District commissioned from Natural Channel Design, one of our local consulting firms. The purpose of this study was to determine the continued flood risk, or debris risk, I should say, coming from the museum fire area, and then also to help with our designs for future flood mitigation, including the sediment basins. As a reminder, we had about 11,000 tons of sediment that was removed from Sunnyside and Grandview this last year, mostly by Public Works, at a cost of roughly $500,000 just in the tipping fees at the landfill, not to mention equipment and labor time. So this study was to help determine the future risk that we have. Natural Channel Design went out in the fall and surveyed 14 miles of drainage within the museum fire area and then down into Sunnyside. And with that model, or with that data that they had, they used 4 different models to determine the amount of sediment risk that we have. So 2 of these were hill slope models, ERMIT, which is the erosion risk management tool, which is developed by the U.S. Forest Service, the Rocky Mountain Research Center, and then the modified universal soil loss equation, which is a typical soil loss equation produced by the Department of Agriculture, and then a channel model called the Bank Assessment for Non-Point Source Consequences of Sediment. I'm not sure why it's called that. BANKS is the acronym. I guess they like the acronym. And then a sediment transport dual model, flow sed, power sed, which is part of a commercial modeling package for applied geomorphology. The results actually mirrored a concurrent study being conducted by the Arizona Geological Survey up in the Museum Fire area. What they're seeing is that the steep slopes are still very vulnerable and still have quite a bit of sediment that can be produced and transported down into the city. Event-based modeling, so rain-based modeling, showed that for a 1-inch storm, there'd be roughly 400 tons of sediment produced. For a 2-inch storm, 3,200, and for a 3-inch storm, 8,900. So that's the 8,900 number was roughly what we saw from the 4 storms that we saw this last year. The annual average with small storms, large storms, etc., that we would expect to see is up to 17,000 tons of sediment being produced by the watershed. So obviously we still have quite a bit of flood risk due to the sediment itself being pushed into the city. The part of this modeling exercise, part of the study, was also look at future conditions. So as the watershed changes and hopefully restores, and this went out for a 5-year time period. And at the end of that 5-year time period, we're still showing a very high risk of sediment and debris movement into the city. So it's not predicted that we're going to see a sharp drop off in sediment supply from the Museum Fire area. The results did recommend, or the study did recommend, continued monitoring, which hopefully we can continue to do with Arizona Geological Survey and NAU. And the sediment transport models also indicated that restoration techniques that the county is hoping to move forward on the alluvial fans should mitigate some of the sediment. That's the purpose that we're going for with the Forest Service money and NRCS money, to the tune of roughly 60 to 80% of the annual load. So we should see a reduction once we have those mitigation measures in place. The study did recommend alluvial fan work on the Forest Service properties, the 40-acre private property near Museum Mount Eldon Estates, and the city property near Parkway. So a total of 9 sites that are already underway in terms of design. The series of alluvial fan projects and sediment basins will work together as a network to help reduce the sediment load into the city. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the county. I believe Lucinda is going to talk a little bit more about the Parkway sediment basins.
Thank you, Ed. I see that Councilmember McCarthy has a question on the siren, so we can keep flowing with the sediment discussion, or Mayor, if you'd like Councilmember McCarthy to ask his question now, we can do that as well.
Yeah, thank you. This is a appropriate transition. So Councilmember McCarthy, if you wanted to ask your question.
Well, thank you. I just had a quick question about the sirens. I hope that you will talk to the people that produce these and see if they needed to be directed a little bit towards the ground level. My concern is if they're just by chance a little bit towards the sky, they'll fill up with water, the water will freeze, and the sirens wouldn't work. So just kind of a heads up to think that through. I'm thinking like this is a design review meeting. So thank you.
I can actually answer that question now if you'd like, Mayor.
Yes, please go ahead.
Correctly, but I know he and there's Sam. Hi, Sam.
Hey, Andy. Yeah, so this is already something we've already considered. This company, as we get closer, has a complete design layout, which accounts for weather, noise carryover. They actually map out the range of which that siren can be heard from the height it will be mounted. There's actually a lot of science behind it, far beyond what I can, understand, but they make it sound very, very easy. But yeah, we're looking forward to seeing how that maps out and what the projections are going to look like moving forward. But we don't foresee any issues in that regard, but I do appreciate the comment.
Well, this is pretty typical. Whenever I have a question, staff's already figured it out. So thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Councilmember McCarthy. With that, we can move on to the wonderful Lucinda.
Thank you, Mayor, and good to see everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to do a brief update on the sediment reduction measures. As you just heard, we do have an opportunity to significantly impact the level of sediment entering the city. And I want to emphasize sediment. Debris is a little bit different dynamic, and I think we as we saw less and less debris. It's really sediment is the real key issue, although all these measures will influence debris as well. And I want to emphasize too that the hill slope, in looking at the study results and the comparison that we saw with Schultz, it was very interesting because a lot of the sediment was generated from the channels coming off the steep slopes of Schultz, whereas in this area, the hillsides are really contributing a lot, and that is of even more concern if you want to understand the impacts of sediment. So anyway, to move ahead, efforts to address this, of course, are both relative to the agreement now that has been completed with the U.S. Forest Service, done in record time, and then the Forest Service has initiated the National Environmental Policy Act, the NEPA process, with the goal of completing that in early May. They're hopeful that there will not be opposition to the efforts on forest to again restore the watershed and reduce the sediment production and capture sediment on the forest and keep it on the forest so it restores those watersheds. And that is the goal, is to complete that process by early May. We are nearing 30% engineering on that project. We're meeting with the Forest Service weekly to go through the details of working through that project and so forth. We did recently meet with the Mount Eldon Estates area, not only to talk about what was proposed for the Forest Service property, which is very close to their properties, of course, as well as what's been proposed through the NRCS Emergency Watershed Protection Funding. And that was at high level because, again, we just completed both agreements. We're approaching 30% engineering on both of those elements. One thing, in terms of the NRCS EWPP project, I think it's important to understand, I think we went through this last time, that there are we've kind of divided this up into two projects within the overall project. One project involves the work within Mount Eldon Estates, within Lockett Ranches, and on the 40 acres, all private properties. The second project involves the work that Ed just mentioned, the Parkway sediment basins element of that project. So we're seeing that as a separate project, and I'll explain why. The Mount Eldon Estates and Lockett Ranches and the 40 acres, the work there is really very, very similar to what we will be doing on forest. It's very, I'll say, traditional EWPP work. Restoration of the watershed, the alluvial fans to capture sediment, more grade control, and arresting the channel erosion through those areas, again, with the goal of reducing the sediment coming into the city and impacting those areas as well. And then the second piece, again, is the Parkway sediment basins. And this is turning into a very complex, frankly, a fairly small scale project, but turning into a very complex project. We have lands rights. We've been working with the city attorney's office, as well as with Bryce Doty, your land rights and acquisition representative, and been working through that process and what that's going to look like. I think you're aware of that. Second, as I mentioned before, there is a section of the historic Bill Wagon Road that is on that section of, is on that project land, land owned by the city. And we are working with the State Historical Preservation Office to ultimately arrive at what's called a memorandum of agreement. That MOA will be signed by the city as well as the district, as well as NRCS, the state historical preservation officers, and then potentially other properties owners that are adjacent to or involved in this project. So we're working through that process right now. They have initiated that process with their consultation effort, and that's moving forward, and that's being basically overseen by the NRCS archaeologist. In addition to that, we also are working with the Army Corps of Engineers, a favorite friend of yours, and this will require, currently this is considered a waters of the U.S., and this will require a permit. Fortunately, the NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, has a standing permit. It's called Permit 37, number 37, and we are working with them and again, hand in hand with NRCS to pursue that permit to gain the approval from Army Corps to go forward with the project as well. And that will require properties that are directly impacted by that project, as well as any projects upstream, to be involved in approving that as well. So that's another complexity to this process. And then of course we'll have to go through a procurement process to secure a contractor for the Sediment Basins project as well. So my expectation relative to the Parkway Sediment Basins, given the complexities, the expected time frame for construction is fall of 2022. I think just given all the dynamics, trying to get this, I mean, we're going to make every effort to try to get into construction and get it completed before the monsoon. But I think it's, frankly, at this point, I think that's unrealistic. And so, but it would be slated for as soon as monsoons dissipate, we would go into construction in the fall. So the other element of that project, of the NRCS project, as well as the Forest Service project, our goal remains to have those elements completed before the monsoon season. And we're, again, working really diligently, a lot of weekends and nights to ensure that we can get that done prior to monsoon. Of course, there's no guarantee. Weather will have a tremendous impact on how quickly we can begin construction, and when we have to end given start of monsoons and so forth. So, but we've got a lot of experience with those projects, and we have an experienced contractor that will be implementing those elements of the project with Forest Service as well as NRCS. So we're again trying to put every effort we can into getting that completed prior to monsoon. I think that is it. Again, we have a lot of complexities to the Sediment Basin project, but that's what comes with projects. You have to work through them and those challenges, and we intend to do that and be able to complete that this fall. So with that's a pretty high level and quick review of the project, and certainly happy to answer any questions at whatever time that's appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm not seeing any Q's and C's in the chat box at this time, so we're good to proceed.
Thank you, Lucinda. We really appreciate both your and Christopher's expertise and, the willingness to work through this project with us. We know you've been at the table with us, and it goes without saying your project at that location is much more complicated than even this next one we're going to talk about. But we've really appreciated all the efforts. Mayor, I did see a question come in by Councilmember Shimoni. If we want to grab it or wait, I'll defer.
Yeah, that's Councilmember Shimoni, please go ahead.
And good evening, Lucian and team. Thank you for the presentation so far, and thank you for all your work, Lucinda. I'm leaving my camera off because of bandwidth issues currently, but I just had a quick question. So in regards to the delay in the effort being done before monsoons, realistically, I'm just wondering, is there a plan in terms of how we're planning to outreach and let the community know, just to manage expectations?
Yes, absolutely. I think within the next couple of weeks, I think we'll have a much better sense of, we have a key meeting later this week with NRCS archaeologist on the Beal Wagon Road element, and Natural Channel Designs is working through an effort with the Army Corps right now. I think within the next couple of weeks, we will have a clearer picture about the timeline relative to all the projects, but particularly relative to the Sediment Basins project. And I think at that point, we'll be prepared to communicate. We did send a letter to those in the area of the Sediment Basins project to let them know that site work, investigative work for the engineering would be underway. Went out and did some geotech, took some samples and so forth, to be able, so NCD can continue with the engineering while the other processes are taking place as well. And I think at that point right now, we did include some of these issues in the letter, but right now it's still somewhat speculative. So I prefer to wait about till we have a little more confidence in our information before we start communicating. But certainly we'll be working with Sarah on those communications and moving forward. And what's really important in this process is that those whose property would be directly affected by the projects, irrespective of, again, where they are, whether it's in Mount Eldon Estates or Lockett Ranches or in Paradise area, they need to be met with first, and they need to understand what's going to take place relative to their specific property. Because we'll need either, in case of Mount Eldon, a cooperator agreement, or in the case of the Paradise project, the city's going to need an easement. And so we want to work with them first so they understand, okay, what is planned, what is the impact on my property, and we can work with them to ultimately secure those agreements, right? Those instruments. So that's really critical. We don't want to jump out and start communicating with the entire community until they've had an opportunity to really understand what's going to happen with their property. And then we will communicate to the entire community. And we found that through Schultz. We found that today, we need to respect that their land is being impacted and that they should have direct communication, one-on-one, face-to-face in the community, out on the land, right? To see it and understand, what does this mean to my property? So.
Thank you, Lucinda. I really appreciate that approach.
Thank you.
Again, thank you, Lucinda, for being here, and thank you, council member. So this next project, if you've been by Killip Elementary School, it's going well. In fact, this slide is a little bit dated. You all are aware and recall the IGA. Adam Yali's been our project manager our senior project manager with Public Works, who's working with Stormwater and Ed Shank's team to deliver the Killip detention basins. Please recall that FUSD is actually delivering the project. We're assisting and providing a substantial amount of funding, but this is a really integral piece, and the mass excavation is well underway. We have encountered some rock, but they've been navigating, dealing with that, and Adam's done a good job of working with the school district to try to come to some resolution. So we're hopeful that by next month we'll have that resolved. Now our focus really is to move the engineering team's efforts towards the Killip School inlet structures at Ponderosa Park and how we're going to move the water from Arroyo Seco into these detention basins. And then the final connections between the actual basins and Third Street to the east. Again, we'll start that piping project that goes in front of the new elementary school, tied into the existing system. But all good news on this front, no concerns to report. Everything's moving very well, and this will be in place and ready to function prior to this year's monsoon season. Next slide, Sarah, you're up.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Sarah Langley, Public Affairs Director. Wanted to finish off this presentation with a quick update on our communications efforts. So the city's second FAQ document was emailed out to the museum flood distribution list on January 14th, a few weeks ago. And that answered a lot of the questions that we received by email from residents over the holiday and New Year period. We also received a few more questions last week by email from a resident, so we are working on answering those as well. So that's kind of an ongoing process. Additionally, we've also started advertising these museum flood updates to the City Council on our social media channels and through the email distribution list, just to make sure that impacted residents know that these updates are happening and they can, join us or watch them later at their convenience. And then moving forward, we are working with Beta PR to start implementing the deliverables outlined in our contract that Council approved about 3 weeks ago now. We're currently finishing up our website, and we're targeting early next week around, I believe, February 7th to go live with that website. We're just waiting on a few last pieces of Spanish translation and a few more design elements for that. So that website will feature overviews of the different projects that you just heard about here. And it'll really act as a repository for all of the previous information we've released on museum flooding and be an easy place for residents to watch previous council updates and things like that. Additionally, we're also planning to send out our first project update flyer early this month, early February. The purpose of that flyer will be really to advertise our website, to get people to sign on to our email distribution list if they haven't done that yet, and then to provide a quick introduction to the city's key infrastructure projects, again, that we talked about tonight within the museum flood area. So that's a brief communications update, and this is our last slide. So with that, I'm sure our group is happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the update. A lot of great work being done, and looking forward to continuing to see the productivity on this. We do have a public commenter that I'd like to take before we move into council discussion and questions. So City Clerk, if you'd like to line them up.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. We have Don Rodriguez on the line. Don, you may go ahead.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council, thank you for listening to me today. Since there are no pre or post flood reports specifically at Dortha, I'll tell you in 3 minutes what happened, why it happened, and how to fix it, and all for free. The second edition City of Flagstaff Museum Flood Question and Answer explained that the flood waters follow the down gradient and at times are also impacted by currents created by bottlenecks. This is one of those common knowledge engineering standards that we have been worrying about for the last 18 years. The water changed direction from north to south to east to west and west to east in the alley, sending half the flow of the Colorado River through people's homes. My testimonies are built on videos and eyewitness accounts, not unreliable, expensive models. There are no thousands of dollars of tech equipment and gauges at Dortha, just old school water lines and common sense. The water line shows that the water easily reached over 10 feet high at this drain. Residents were warned of water, not seismic cement mud, that prevented the free flow of water through any type of fence, including chain link fences. An unprecedented situation never described in Arizona court cases or statutes was further aggravated by the upside down, unregulated box bridge design following basic rules of engineering. If the building of an inferior dam and burying the neighborhood in water was the goal, The dam wasn't built as high as the Arroyo Seco precautions, and sandbags were used instead of Jersey barriers. So when those sandbags buckled, 1% of the 11 tons of mud mentioned was directed through homes that never should have been affected on this scale. This millions of dollars mistakes ruined countless lives, and I'm here asking for it to be resolved by the following three options. The first option, build the box bridge already at Dortha. The second option, open the road, move out all the Jersey barriers and sandbags so the water does not travel against gravity. The third option, and our personal favorite, because we have never been more at peace since the road has been closed, tear up the road and make it part of the alley for good. We have tried sharing this information in private, but we were told no. And if we have learned anything over the years, it is to include the most people to find better solutions. Also, the project in the alley, I'm not sure what they're doing, but it hasn't. We were supposed to hear from the realtor person in January, the first week of January, and just FYI, it's February. We haven't heard anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Was there anything you wanted to add regarding the not hearing anything or steps forward?
Yeah, well, nothing to add, but I gave 3 solutions there. I know I only get 3 minutes. You know, I'm doing like everything that these like 15 people are doing, I'm doing by myself, and I only get 3 minutes, and I can't do presentations. So I have a lot more to say, but it's not. So I gave 3 solutions. And to better explain it, because I know people might be confused, I've offered tours and stuff, but a lot of the problem is that there's a drain on Dortha, and so when it plugs up, and this mud, it was in the newspaper, it's seismic mud, it's insane. And I know, thank you for everybody for doing all this work, and I know you guys have a lot of work, but I think I have a pretty good control of the situation, and I'm doing this like on weekends and stuff. So, I mean, thank you, but I think more could be done. So my question is, they were gonna do something in the alley. Is that whatever they were gonna do back there? Is that still gonna be done?
Thank you, Don. We'll definitely be asking that question during the council cues and discussion. I just really appreciate you always speaking up, providing the information of what's happening on the ground, because that is an extremely important component of this, not just models and figures and dollar amounts, but the lived experience so many are facing. So I just want to say thank you for always providing that perspective to us on council through these meetings. Vice Mayor Daggett does have a question for you.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Don, so much. Can you state your number 2 point again? I was taking notes and I didn't get number 2.
Don, you are muted.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. My number 2 point. So when the drain gets plugged in the alley with that seismic mud that was in the newspaper, it moved everything up. That's why at Linda Vista they measured like 5 feet. Where we are, it was over 10 feet because that drain got plugged. The mud plugged it, so it turned into a dam because then it moved the water up. So the way that the sandbags were arranged, and they put sandbags when they should have had Jersey barriers like they did. They reinforced it at Arroyo Seco. So when they did that inferior dam, it busted up. And so we've never had flooding like this. And I know they're going to say, you know, the fire and this and that. But when my husband would clean out the alley, he did it because our babysitters lived on rows. And so they would say, you know, your daughter's scared, there's water. So we never flooded. I never made that point clear. We never flooded. So if we play by the rules that the engineers are saying, that you can't prevent you can't put up barriers, then they shouldn't be building dams. So if the first one was, of course, the box bridge, the second one was just to move everything out and let the water flow. It's an alluvial fan. You have to account, if it's bottleneck there, you have to account for the westerly flow, the easterly flows, and the alluvial fan. You can't make a dam and then have the people from, I mean, it backed up, council, it backed up from Dorotha all the way up to Cedar. And if it was open and there were no, just move everything out. That's the second thing that I'm asking.
Thank you,
Thank you
Dawn.
for the question.
Thank you, Don. And Vice Mayor
You're welcome.
Daggett. I'm not seeing any further Cs and Qs for Don at this time. Do we have any further commenters on this agenda item before we go to discussion and questions for staff?
No, Mayor, that was our last one.
All right, thank you, City Clerk. Well, with that, let's open this up for discussion amongst council and answer any questions that we may have for the presenters. Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, staff, for all of the presentations. I have a question for Sarah and possibly for Lucinda as well, but I'll ask it and you all can fight over who answers it. Sandbags, old sandbags that need to be removed and the new sandbags that need to be placed. What is our communication plan and our volunteer plan for making that happen before monsoons?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I'll let Scott and Lucinda answer that, and then I can jump in with any communications support needed. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Mayor. I think we'll get some support here from a couple different angles. This is certainly a timely time to ask that question. We have started our internal discussion to start thinking about what it looks like to shore up short-term mitigations. We know there's anxiousness to try to understand that better today. I think you're going to find that it's going to look very similar to the way it's looked the last couple of years. Some of those requests are going to be made again, as a lot of our mid and long-term mitigations are not completed and it's not proven up to be totally successful quite yet. So we know there's effort ahead. I know we just spoke about it at our Monday engineering meeting that we need to start thinking this through from the operations side of the house. And we're going to have to communicate what our expectation is, what the role of both agencies, including the flood district, might be. But those are conversations that we have not had to date for this coming monsoon season. Andy, Lucinda?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary, Scott, and I think we're in the process. I think we've all identified there's a set of meetings that need to occur. I think probably the first one will involve Andy and Scott and the city manager and county manager and myself and to sit down and talk high level first about where are we going with the mitigation efforts for this summer. You know, who's going to take responsibilities for the various elements of the process, the EOC process, all of that work, make sure we're all on the same page, and then lay out the actual plan for that, and then be able to communicate that, much like we've done the last 2 years. But as Scott indicated, the emergency measures that have been put into place should be kept into place, because we will not mitigate all flood events. And that's important. I had a set of residents provide some additional video and photographs from Mount Eldon Estates area. And we want you to know at this event, this happened. And absolutely we want to understand what happened if we're not there. Most of it we're pretty aware of, but I reiterated with them, we cannot mitigate every flood event. That just isn't going to happen. And it would be hundreds of millions of dollars. So, making those decisions, the city is on the right path in terms of putting together a a good process that's going to have a set of projects that are going to come out of this that will help mitigate those more frequent type of storms that we see. The big storms, it's still going to be really challenging and for the entire flood area. And that's just something we're going to live with, unfortunately, for a long time. So,
do you all foresee the city and or the district being on hand to help remove the debris from broken sandbags and sandbags that need to be replaced? I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is we foresee helping the residents to get rid of what they need to get rid of and to reset bags that they need to reset, correct? There's going to be help for them.
So remember that over the last 2 years, in terms of the support, you know, we've utilized Arizona Conservation Corps and volunteers to assist people who are, we call it AFN, that have physical challenges, disabilities, elderly. We've supported that. To support those who are able-bodied, we've distributed the bags throughout the neighborhoods and have distributed, the city's distributed dumpsters where those can be deposited, the old sandbags and old materials, you know, whatever, you know, things related to that, not garbage, but can be deposited. So I see it again being very similar again this year. And in terms of, you know, what we can support here, we're walking, you know, a line of level of resources, gift clause of the state statutes. There's a number of fine points we're walking here to help support people as much as we can, but also people need to take responsibility as well. And a neighbor helping neighbor, you know, we certainly intend to fully utilize and work with United Way to mobilize volunteers, which has been very successful. As you know, you've been out on the ground on pretty much every one of those events. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. And then Sarah, how and when will we be communicating this to the residents?
Thanks, Vice Mayor. Yeah, I think as soon as, you know, we have a clear and consistent message after those meetings that Scott mentioned take place, which will be very soon, we can work with the county. We have close relationships with their communications folks, so we can make sure that we're staying consistent there and really use all the channels that we have available, whether that be, you know, email, door-to-door campaigns to let people know about various resources, social media, all those different things. So we can definitely put together a plan to get that word out there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Shimoni?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you all for the presentation again. I don't really have many questions or any really at all. I think you all are doing a good job, and I appreciate that. My only comment really is kind of just in line to Vice Mayor's comment about sandbags. You know, when we do decide to move forward, I'm just thinking if it might be a good idea to, you know, engage the university athletes, high school athletes, you know, Greek life, different clubs. I know that we have a lot of student power, and if that's helpful at all, that's definitely a resource that, you know, if there's help needed in tapping into, I might be able to assist with that. But if that's something we're already doing, I know that we've had those partnerships in the past. I'm just trying to think about, you know, how to make our work easier and leverage that human power that we have in our youth and our student population. But I know you all are thinking about that already, so just wanted to add that comment, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment back to Councilmember Shimoni. Definitely, we're already thinking about that, and we've thrown that idea around with our neighborhood liaison, Valedia Chase, to see how we could kind of link up and get students more involved in service projects such as this. So we'll definitely be utilizing those channels as we move forward. Thanks.
And Councilmember Shimoni, thank you for the question and the comment. And it really does get to promoting that helping neighbor environment. We had several members of the athletic teams from NAU making sandbags at the county public works facilities, and that production was such that it allowed us to get the sandbags into the community where they were most needed. Also, with the United Way volunteer efforts, I know our city manager, Greg Clifton, was out, on those efforts, helping people muck out, so to speak, all that debris and the sediment basins that Lucinda's talking about in those on-forest measures. It's not just the flow of floodwaters, but it's also that debris impact. And we have to be really careful as a local government, as Lucinda had mentioned, when we engage directly on private property. And I think we've managed that really well, where we can help organize or contribute to those efforts in a way that doesn't get into any of those gift clause type issues that we can experience, but organizing those neighbor helping neighbor events and those community events. We had both of the athletic teams from Coconino and Flagstaff High School. Coconino High being directly impacted just right outside of that flood area. And it also helps us get the word out to the community when we have community members involved in that area. So many people I heard from that live on the west side, so to speak, said, I had no idea. And so it really is probably, in thinking about the natural disasters that our community has faced over the last however many years, as long as I've been here, this is probably the biggest one that we, the city of Flagstaff, has faced. And so it's just something that if we can get the entire community involved, it's super helpful to have that effort going forward.
Thank you. And with these discussions, I'd like to be able to kind of set a timeline for it. So we are likely, I drive by Grandview and Linda Vista in that neighborhood near daily. I'm expecting we are going to have to replace over 100,000 sandbags this year. That's a minimum. That's 3 million pounds of sand we have to get rid of and replace. And with that, I would like to aim for starting really in earnest the first week of April to start replacing sandbags, organizing volunteer efforts around that, or at least, having United Way act as that intermediary. But I want us to be conscientious because, as we know, fire and flood season is going to be right up in front of us very quickly. And we need to replace a lot of these bags. So let's make sure we're giving us enough bandwidth in starting it that we can get those sandbags replaced with volunteers before those floods really start in earnest. So want to throw that out there and or learn what your timeline expectations were for replacing those sandbags.
I will just share that we have 75,000 sandbags at County Public Works. I'll say ready for deployment. And certainly we can make more. I'd actually asked Sam. Sam coordinated this effort last year, and typically fairly soon we would do an assessment. And I think it's important to also understand that over the last 3 years, we have replaced bags sequentially, right? So don't have to go in and replace all of them, but I agree. I think there's going to be a substantial number. A lot of those, that they typically have around a 3-year life, and here in our territory, their life is shortened by UV exposure as well as the snow and freeze thaw cycle. So we've got a significant effort, that we'll do. And I know we've already had conversations, and Sam has identified resources both for the city to contract and the district to contract with the conservation corps coming into this spring. And they can both be deployed again to support those that have physical needs. but also to make sandbags. So, and if we identify there may well be some other resources, COVID has also affected. I mean, in 19, we used the DOC crews, fire crews, they are exceptionally productive. And so, we can try to reach out and secure some of those resources again as well. They may or may not, they have not been available, both because of fire and because of COVID over the last 2 years so we have some resources, but it may be that it largely rests with the community responding and supporting, neighbor to neighbor. So.
Yeah, and I just thank you for that. I just want to make sure that we are doing our part to help organize or initiate that process, really. I mean, I'm just thinking about when I look down Grandview, all of these torn out bags. This isn't just a matter of replacing it for the protection of those individuals. I'm thinking about how much sand and debris is going to be running into Sunnyside to clog up the inlet and other areas if we do not replace them. So to me, I know we got the gift clause, we have the private property aspect, but there's also the fact that this sand is going to go somewhere if it's washed away, and it will clog up our system downstream if we collectively, neighbor to neighbor, governments, whatever else, don't get a handle on it preemptively. And really, when we are talking, we put out 700,000 sandbags, well, 100,000 that we need to replace, double that amount of time to get rid of what is already there. We just need to be conscientious of the time, because I don't want to roll around and starting the end of May, we start this process up to clear these out and replace them, and not have the time and resources to fulfill that before the monsoons hit. So just throwing out there, and I mean, these things happen a lot quicker than right around the corner than what we're really thinking about as we think about snow plowing efforts right now, for example. So
yeah, absolutely.
So appreciate all the efforts and all the hard work on this front, and we'll just keep up the tenacious efforts that we have been seeing from staff, volunteers, and everyone else. So with that, any further comments or questions from City Council? I'm not seeing anything further. Thank you for all the efforts, the presentation, and discussion regarding the museum flood projects. With that, we are down to